What does it take to make workshops work? And how can we facilitate collaboration that sticks and leads to results? My name is Miriam Hatness, and with the Workshops Work podcast, I'm on the mission to find the magic ingredients that make workshops work. Today with me on the show is Marilyn Zakhour, and we speak about the future of work and change management, but beyond the buzzwords. We speak about remote teams and what it is that makes them work, and we talk about the very operational, hands-on tasks and steps that we can do as facilitators. And by the way, if you don't have pen and paper at hand to take your own notes, scroll down to the show notes to download my free one-page summary. And now, enjoy. Marilyn, welcome to the show.
Thanks. I'm so happy to be here.
Yes, it was a delight to meet you in person, flesh and bones, in Dubai, just a few weeks ago.
Yeah, that's a real treat.
Yes, and I had to hold back and not to ask too many questions so that I can keep my curiosity for the recording to share it with the audience.
Yeah, and even with that, we managed to spend, I don't know, was it like 4 hours together?
Yes.
That was so brilliant. I hadn't had one of those conversations in years, I want to say.
Yeah, so many topics to explore.
Absolutely.
So let's start at the beginning. When did you start calling yourself a facilitator? And actually, do you?
Yeah, I thought about this question, and it's really interesting because for the longest time, and still to this day, I have many moments where I'm guilty of being, well, not guilty, where my persona is more that of a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And when you teach, you can't facilitate, because when you teach, you are telling people something. Right? And I think both roles are very important. I don't think it's a bad thing to sometimes be in a position of dictating or telling or teaching. But I think I started calling myself a facilitator when I realized that some situations call on me to shut up.
Amen.
Yeah. And you know, to create a space for others to speak and make decisions. I think I play the role of a facilitator when I'm supporting usually executives or leadership teams in making a decision for their company. And there, I think it's not my place to teach. I can give them information and data to help improve their decision-making process. But in the end, nobody knows better than them what's right for their company. And that's when I started switching roles, like taking one hat off and putting the other on. I even think like everything in me changes, my body language, the way I'm speaking, the rhythm of my voice. Like I know when I'm switching to facilitator mode, and it's when I'm letting somebody else take the front stage. And my job is just to help them land where they need to go, as opposed to teach them something.
Love that. And I think it's also the moment where we calm down, we ask more questions, we literally hold the space for them to investigate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I get the difference or the difficulty or maybe the ease to switch from teaching to facilitating. And I know that you've been a manager before. So how is the switch from being a manager? Because there it's not teaching, it's telling. Very often. Well, it depends a little bit on your management style. But how is it to switch then from managing, being a manager, to being a facilitator? And when are you switching your hat? Because it can also be a benefit for your clients that you have the expertise.
Yeah, completely. Look, I still think that as far as being a facilitator, I'm also very hands-on in terms of the services that I offer to my clients on the execution side. Part of it is because I don't think that it's enough to help a company or a group of people reach a decision. Sometimes what they already knew what they wanted to do, but it's what they find hardest to make it happen. So I will still say that whether that's good or not, it depends on the client. I'm still very hands-on with helping them with the project management piece and the execution piece. I'm never satisfied with just leaving them with the decision if I can choose what path to take. And that's where my manager piece comes back in, because I temporarily try to join their team, so to speak, to kind of amplify their skill sets. But I also have had situations where people didn't need me to help them execute. They're just incredible at their job. They just needed support and in landing that final agreement, that final decision as a group. And there I know to stay out of the rest of it, right? Because they don't need the additional support. They're super capable of implementing. They just needed decision-making frameworks. And that's where, for me, that switch is to realize that I'm in front of a group of people who just need some data, the ability to generate optionality, and a decision-making framework. Because today I was saying this to somebody earlier in a conversation, like as managers, we always make imperfect decisions. It's actually what we get paid to do in principle, right? Which is you can't gather all the data that you want. You may not have time to generate the full optionality so that you can have a full decision tree analysis, and you still have to make a decision. So my job is just to help managers improve their decision-making process. And that's where I'm fully in my facilitator role, which is just to guide them through that series of steps and then let them go at the end of it.
Thank you so much for this reminder. My brain is firing in all different directions. I try to stay focused. Because first, I love how you approach your services and serving your clients, which sounds almost more like project facilitation, where, yes, facilitation is nice to help them to come to ideas, but then leaving them doesn't make their life necessarily easier, or not for all of them. So how can you make it easier by also offering the project facilitation, which is different from project management? So you enable them. That's what I hear. And the second bit is yes, of course, there are imperfect decisions by definition, because we don't know the counterfactual and we'll never have perfect information. And then to enable a leader to come to a decision, accept that there will never be perfect information because there's a trade-off between speed or pace and accuracy. And at the end, we never know whether it was a right decision. So embracing this uncertainty and finding comfort in the imperfect decision, it's something that we have to embrace as facilitators all the time. And that's maybe then, again, the mix between the teacher role and the facilitator.
Yes, exactly. And I always find it, difficult to fully separate them from each other. But it's because I've been a manager myself, right? And I know that oftentimes I'm not, it's always the story like, do you want a hole in the wall or do you want the drill? Right? And what you want is the hole in the wall. And so when you're hiring an external facilitator, you want an outcome for your organization. You don't want a facilitated session. Actually, it doesn't matter what the tool is. What you want is, I want to reach a decision, a conclusion. I want to upgrade my knowledge. I want to grow, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve as a team. I want us to get better at joint decision, whatever it is that you're doing. And the outcome is what matters. And so when I work with my clients, I try to stay focused on the outcome rather than what did I sell you, or did you think you needed a session and that was it? I always regret it actually when all I sell them is one session, because it doesn't give them the outcome that they need. They need more than that. Sometimes they need a side conversation afterwards. Sometimes they need to come back a couple of weeks later and see if they've changed their minds. Like they need a process. Mm-hmm. They don't just need a session. And I remember that from my management days, like, okay, you walk into a session, you leave it enlightened, and then what, right? There's always the then what question. And I think the outcome is what I stay focused on. What did you want to achieve for your company? And did I actually help you to do that?
And how do you then help them or facilitate bridging the knowing doing gap? Because yes, they come out of the session and they know exactly what to do. And then life happens. Their calendar is cramped. They don't have time to breathe or to think. And they just rush from one meeting to the next. And at 9 p.m., they're just exhausted.
Yeah. So actually, we do two things. Even when we just sell a facilitation session, although we do also sell kind of more long-term engagements, is we always end up sending an action plan following our session, which is, here's what you guys have to do now. And some things we have discussed in the session, and some things are just additive from us to say like, okay, so what we've heard and where you've landed, this is the next steps for you. And that's where having been a manager is super helpful, because I know like the intricacy of execution in companies of all sizes. And I've luckily been able to work in really small organizations, but also in really big corporates. And so we're able to identify as a team, like, what are the actual next steps, including the politics, including the internal communications, including all of this other stuff that isn't just getting stuff done, but getting people on board, right? So we send them an action plan and then we follow up. I think people really need others to keep them accountable for what they need to do. And they love it when that happens. They're like, this is incredible. I had, given into the crisis of the day-to-day stuff. And I'm really grateful that you reminded me that this really important thing hasn't gotten enough of my time. And I think every manager wants that. They want like an employee or a chief of staff or a coach or whatever it is that says, you said this was really important, but you haven't spent any time on it. And I don't think that they react negatively. They always react with a lot of gratitude to say, oh my God, thank you for bringing that back.
I dare to challenge that. And I wonder whether it might be the crowd or the kind of managers that you attract with your services and your presence that you shout out into the world. Because I also know the other kind of managers who, driven by fear, by uncertainty, by ego, by you name it, then don't want to be reminded of their shortcomings, of what they might have forgotten, of their insecurities to have control over everything. So I think that there's a huge trust component to come to the stage to really allow that help in. Because asking for help is a very adventurous moment, not to say vulnerable.
I understand what you're saying. And I think that that's true of all of us. We want to save face. We want to show that we're on top of everything. We want to exert control. But I think in the way that you phrase something or the way that you approach it or how you offer help, you can disable that reflex of saying like, who the hell do you think you are to tell me what I'm supposed to be doing? You can disable that and you can show them that actually what you're committed to is their success and that failure and iteration and, setbacks are just a natural part of the process, but that you won't let them fall. Because the thing is, and I'm sure that there are managers who don't want that, but they'll probably not hire us either. Like these things tend to come hand in hand. But even with very resistant leaders that I've worked with, to your point, I think you establish a level of trust where they understand, actually, I don't need to do any of this, by the way. I sold you a facilitation. We're done. I sent you a recap because I'm really nice and I could walk away. Right. And I think there's something in that partnership to say, but I won't. Because I care about your success more than I care about what I sold you. That eventually, I think every leader with a slightly open mind will really appreciate. I've never faced anyone who told me you're getting involved in something that doesn't concern you.
Beautiful. I think what I hear is this extra care, showing care and going the extra mile that pays off. And I think it's irresistible. Just for another human being, if you feel that someone genuinely cares, I think it's stronger than us. That's maybe some parental instincts or so that get triggered that we cannot resist if it's genuine. So, thank you for the reminder.
Yeah. And I think, look, from a very tangible, why is this good for everybody point of view? We have clients, one client once called us the fairies because even though at first everybody's resistant, they're like, why are you getting up in my business? What they see after hopefully 2 or 3 weeks of us working together, being pushy, reminding them, we even write emails that they're supposed to send to other people, right?
Love that.
We really go the extra mile. So it's not like, oh, Miriam, you're supposed to tell Marilyn this. We're like, Miriam, we decided together last time that you wanted to communicate this and we thought you have a really busy schedule. So we wrote the email, feel free to edit it, but this is the gist of what you wanted to say, right? And it's just, eventually they just see okay, you know how hard it is to stop doing what you're doing and write an email? You think it's a 5-minute problem, but it's a 30-minute problem or it's an hour-long problem. And they just see that oh my God, this person just made something work.
Especially because it's writing an email only becomes the 1 hour problem if you start overthinking. So if you're too much into the daily business and you care, oh, what will Judy think about that? And Thomas, he might misread this word. And then, there's Stephen. And so there's all this kind of inner dialogue that the person who has to write the email has to send the email might struggle with. If the fairies are writing the email, then it's easy just to read it from this external perspective. Like, oh, yeah, that's fine.
Exactly.
So you're taking the overthinking away and thereby liberating so much extra energy.
And time. And once they start to see that, then they call us back in. I have clients now who call me for things I don't actually sell, because what they know is that the problem will be solved one way or another. Not like, oh, she's going to come in and do a workshop for us, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's really, as a facilitator, understanding the outcome rather than the input. And as far as it is within my purview and my capability and my knowledge, helping push towards the outcome even beyond the scope of what I sold has made it so that, about 2/3 of our business is repeat clients that have been there from day one.
As a facilitator, do you ever find yourself stuck in a rut using the same activities over and over again? Or do you find yourself without a plan B, even though we know that things never go according to plan? That's why we made Facilitator Cards. I'm Meg Bolger. I'm a professional facilitation geek and the CEO of Facilitator Cards. Facilitator Cards are the helpful nudge you need to get more creative in your workshops. They're a pocket-sized tool that you can use offline to create agendas and backup plans for your virtual and in-person facilitations. And for Workshops Work listeners, you can get a free set of wet erase markers to use with your facilitator cards by using the code WORKSHOPSWORK at facilitator.cards. That's facilitator.cards, and enter WORKSHOPSWORK at checkout.
Which leads me then to another question. When is a project then finished? And at what point would you say that your business suddenly moved from being a consulting business to an interim management business?
A really great question. When we do the consulting piece, actually, and this again is part of, because I was a manager, I designed it this way. We do consulting, which is, first we learn about your business. So we actually become almost equally or more knowledgeable than you about that specific problem. Obviously not everything, but the thing you hired us to address for you. Then we become consultants, meaning we take a step back, we analyze, we strategize, we give you a proposal about what we think the way forward is. Then we become project managers, which is we help you to execute it. And once the bulk of what needs to be executed is done, the worst thing that could happen is we walk away and then none of this sticks around. So how we end the project is training, scaling, propagating what we've done. So whether it's training other people, creating documentation, adding things to the onboarding experience of your new employees so that this becomes the norm of how we do things here, working on internal comms with you. So we'll go a step further to make sure that it becomes deeply ingrained. And in an ideal world, and we've managed to do that with a couple of clients, we come back 6 months later and we do a survey just for the new joiners about this thing that we changed, right? And we see if the people that we've never met, so they weren't there when we were supporting, now also operate in this new way. And that to me is the final closure, because now I can say this was sustainable change.
And what I hear is that you cracked change management without even calling it change management, right? And what I mean by that is change management is this huge word, this thing that brings so many companies to fail, where there's so many specialists out there and involves so many people and so many workshops. And then nothing happens and people burn out or frustrated and they leave. And when you explain it, it seems so smooth, easy.
Because what we knew from day one is, yes, and we definitely do a lot of change management in that process. You know the data, right? 70% of change management projects fail because of resistance from employees. And the second highest reason for why they fail is the middle management doesn't support it or role model it or know how to deal with the transition, right?
Blame the middle management.
By the way, you and I had this discussion.
Yes.
I am like the biggest supporter of middle management that you will ever meet. I am the last person to bash them because I think middle management gets all the pressure from above and all the pressure from below, and rarely do they get the support that they deserve. But since those are the reasons for failure, like the approach has always been for us that we hold people's hands through the process. So we go back to like primitive feelings. Why do people resist change? Because they're afraid. Why do they resist change? Because they're ashamed that they're not going to be able to sustain it. Why do they not adopt this new technology, process, whatever? Because no one explained to them why they should do it, and no one gave them context, and then no one really made sure that they learned how to do it. It's just like, here's a new process, please apply it tomorrow, you know? And we realized that like we cannot be successful in our interventions if all we do is convince top management that this is the right way forward. We need to help everybody else across the hierarchy adopt it. And if we don't, then yeah, we'll always be smart consultants. Like I think it's with today's access to information, consulting is an easy job. Like there are so many smart people out there who can look at a bit of data and look at case studies and say, this is a good strategy. I think the hardest one is holding people's hand through this change, especially in a post-pandemic world where everybody's exhausted, has been through more than they ever thought they would have to, has changed everything in their lives. You can't just throw a deck at people and say like, this is how we're working as of tomorrow. So I think that human aspect, you mentioned care earlier, it's such a big part of how we approach it, that compassion to say, I'm going to hold your hand, we're going to do it together.
And as you said, to allow this fear in order that it doesn't transform into shame.
Yes.
I recently heard on a podcast that shame always happens in silence and it cannot survive if you communicate.
Exactly.
So communicating about these fears and about the not knowing and the change that is coming is magic. I wonder now, to what extent would you include all these affected people in the process? Because I think there's a balance. And this might also be the difference between a full-fledged change management versus a consulting versus a one-off workshop.
Mm-hmm. So even for one-off workshops, interestingly, I always make it part of the process that before the workshop, I get to interview 3 or 4 people from across the hierarchy of what this workshop is trying to solve. When we do bigger consulting missions, I'll do 20 interviews. I'll do a survey for everybody. So I'll even be more comprehensive in involving the different layers that are impacted. But even for a small workshop, even by the way, if it's material that I've had for years, like I have a design thinking workshop that I've had for 7, 8, 9 years. Of course, it's evolved through time, but I could do it in my sleep, you know. I ask to talk to people. I look at case studies from inside the business that are relevant, and I try to understand how this would be implemented if after we work, even if it's just one workshop. It means maybe that, you know, our pricing is a bit higher than everybody else, but I don't think it's that much. I mean, adding 4 hours of preparation to a workshop is not crazy, but being able to speak to people and hear their story and understand the blockage so that in the workshop, as I'm giving examples, as I'm focusing on one area versus another, I'm focusing on what's relevant for them.
And I think the clients you're talking to are not paying for the workshop or for the time, they're paying for the results and for the transformation.
Yes, I always try, honestly, to talk to the business side and not to HR, if I can be a bit like, of course, HR is not the same in every company, and some of them are amazing business partners, but sometimes all they want is to tick off an learning and development box. And if that's who I'm talking to, then I know we're not going to do a good job because that's not what I'm good at. Some other person is going to be amazing at that, and they should hire them, right? What we're good at is the outcome. And so if you don't see that, if all you want is a 4-hour training on design thinking, then don't hire us.
Fascinating. Yes. It all boils down to the purpose.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why like talking to a team leader or a business unit leader or an HR person that's like very, you know, this is a true business partner and not just focusing on organizing courses, right? then they see the value in what we do. Because otherwise, it's normal. I understand that's not what you're out to buy, and I'm trying to sell you something, and that's not what you were shopping for. But it always helps to have someone who understands, like, and after this is how we're going to implement it in our business.
And it makes total sense to me also just from the way how you operate after. So as I reflected before, it's based on trust. So you're writing emails for someone, you're telling them what to do. They must buy in and they must say, Marilyn, I trust you to do that. And otherwise it would be an HR business partner introducing you,
exactly,
which adds an extra step, an extra potential friction, because it is not a learning and development project that you're offering.
Yeah, exactly.
From your experience, what makes a workshop fail and what makes a project fail?
So many things can make a workshop fail. But I think for me, one of the main things, and again, it goes back to internal comms, is when people don't understand why they're here and what should happen after. Because then they don't know what position to adopt in that workshop, right? Like, you show up to a workshop, no one's explained to you why we chose this one. How's it going to change our business process or the way we do things or our team dynamics or whatever it is that we're working on? Then you don't have context. Then you can't have good outcomes. And I find that to be the case a lot, that internal comms is just one of these things that so many companies are not good at. Even in the best companies, they're just not good at treating everybody like a mature adult and explaining context and just letting people know, here's what we're hoping to achieve. They kind of invite people to these workshops like it's going to be a magic trick. Like, you don't need to do anything before and you don't need to do anything after. Like, this 4 hours or 6 or 2 or whatever they are going to magically transform everything.
Candy.
Yeah, and it doesn't work like that. You have to do the hard work. And so that to me is the biggest determinant of if the workshop outcomes will be realized or not, is, did you communicate?
Love it. Absolutely love it. Thank you. And a question that I've never asked before, but I think it's so apparent. What's the cost of a failed workshop?
Time, setbacks, taking people back a step instead of one forward. Like, I would rather do no workshop than a failed one, because not only did you not progress people into a new way of thinking, working, behaving, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, you've also made them cynical about it. They'll be like, another one of these workshops where we come together and nothing happens. And so you increase their resistance to change further.
So how can you make it up? So what would be your advice of what comes after a failed workshop? Are you packing your bags and say, didn't work, I leave the territory to someone else? How can you recover?
A retrospective. And then action. I'll give you an example. We had a client recently where we sold the workshop in English. And then they said, but you all speak Arabic. Can you try doing this in Arabic with some of our staff, because they're not like native English speakers and they would participate more. Now, this staff happens to be in Saudi Arabia and I'm Lebanese and Tala is Syrian Palestinian. And the intricacies of this is that actually Lebanese Arabic does not sound the same at all as Saudi Arabic. At all. I mean, we understand each other, but this was a workshop about values where language really matters, right? And so they had really negative feedback about it, even though the same workshop in English worked really well.
Oh.
And even though it wasn't in our scope and we had done it just as a favor, we did a retrospective. We sent them a survey. We asked them to sign up for a second workshop where we would hire a Saudi facilitator to do it. And we brought them back in the room and said, we're so grateful you told us this was shit, because now we're trying to fix it. And then you can sell that to the client. Of course, it's not like you have to do all of this for free. You can be like, okay, well, we failed. Let's fix it together. Are you up for it? Here's the feedback we got, but here's the plan for how we can do it better. And then you do another one. You know, we often think of like, even me, like I go into workshops thinking I'm going to transform people's lives, but it's a process and it's okay to fail as long as you learn together and hopefully convince the client that it's worth it to invest in a second one.
Wonderful. Thank you. Hands-on advice, as we know it. Thank you for staying tuned and listening to the show. I appreciate your attention as I know how busy you are. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and engage by sharing your comments and thoughts, and visit workshops.work to download the one-page summary. I'm looking forward to seeing you back at the next episode, and I wish you a fruitful day.